Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. It's part 2 of the cast today, probably. My name is Rotten Deadite, and with me today are...
I am James, also known as Aramithius.
I'm Andrew, also known as the White Guar.
And I am Felix, also known as Banahan Masashi, and also eating because I'm running behind and I need my snacks.
That's right.
In order to deal with what's coming, folks. We got
we got Sermon 11 today of the 36 Lessons of Vivec, and this is a fun one. There's plenty to cover. It's not like Sermon 15 fun, but it's fun.
It's one of my favorites.
quote fun.
Yeah, it's
It's not exactly fun in the Dwarf Fortress sense, but kind of getting there.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's not fun. Finally, we have the formation of Resdania, which is the that's what we're starting with. This is the very, very brief, it seems, period of time when the Chimer and the Dwemer were united, which for some reason I don't actually have a duration of Resdania. So I don't know how long it lasted, but I don't think it was 1,000 years.
Maybe the real Resdania was in our hearts all along.
It's the friends we made along the way.
It basically lasted long enough to kick the
Nords out.
Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, the Nords were came along around what 461 of the first era or thereabouts.
Give you an actual hold on.
But basically, we've got a date for when the Nords conquered Morrowind, and it lasted from then up until the Battle of Red Mountain, which was 700. So it lasted for what, 300 years-ish, maybe? Well, maybe not quite that suddenly, because it will have taken the Chimer and the Dwemer a while to sort out the differences, and for Nerevar to get round and chat to everyone.
Playing the whole time too.
Let's see. Izmir shows up at First Era 500. No, I'm sorry.
Nope.
He takes the throne in Windhelm at 480.
Yes.
When does he... Clan Rorken settled in Vollenfell, which means that was around... Blah, 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 blah.
Yes, because that was in response to the formation of Resdania.
Yeah.
So that would absolutely be the start of it, so to speak. So
I have that the Nords are driven from Morrowind in 416 of the first era.
In when?
Okay, 416.
416.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yes, I have it right here too. Yeah.
And then the War of the First Council happens to 100 and some change years after that.
Yeah.
And then Battle of Red Mountain, the Dwemer vanish about 700.
700,
well,
yep.
It depends on what account you read, because some accounts of the War of the First Council say that the Battle of Red Mountain kicks it off.
Yeah,
right.
in my timeline, I've got a little dragon break.
Yeah.
Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, and then
Yeah. Yagna Stormskull, which Eastmere? Yes, it's Wolfarth, because they're all Wolfarth in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, and so it's going to be which is yeah, right. So it's a few hundred years, pretty good. And the Chimer and the Dwemer lived under the wise and benevolent rule of Omsivi and their champion, the Hortator. I wouldn't say the Dwemer were happy about it.
No.
But they did it. And Telmore independent. Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Check again to make absolutely sure that I'm actually broadcasting on the internet.
Timeline.
Yes. When the gods of Veloth would retreat unto their own to mold the cosmos and other matters, I'm sure they did, the Hortator would at times become confused, and Vivec would always be there to advise him, and this is the first of the 3 lessons of the ruling kings, so we're going to do this for sermons 11, 13, and 15.
Yes, and that actually happens as a kind of a preamble to each of those, the kind of, these were the days of Resdania when the Chimer and Dwemer lived. It's a formulaic thing that's a device to set up that, so you know that this is one of the lessons of the ruling kings that's coming. So this is a literary device set up to frame a parable that is giving you a story to something else in the set of the 36 lessons.
So, and for these lessons, Vivec decides he's going to come out of the gate swinging. With the waking world as the amnesia of dream.
Yep, that's a good way to start.
So, okay. all right. So the an amnesia is supposed to be like you've forgotten a memory or things that you've forgotten or you can't remember, and so the amnesia of dream should be, one would expect, a forgotten dream. But from what we understand of the sort of metaphysics of the universe, not entirely sure that I would qualify any of the dreams that various beings are having as forgotten.
I've always kind of clocked it as that the waking world has forgotten that it is a dream.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of see it as like when you're asleep and when you're dreaming, unless you are one of those folks who can lucid dream. I can. You're in your dream and you're there. You're not wherever you are. You forget about real life in those dreams, if that makes sense. So it's you have that temporary amnesia, and then you wake up and then it all comes back to you.
I love how we all have very different views on this immediate opening scene.
Yeah, immediately nobody agrees with anything.
Welcome to the Elder Scrolls lore, folks. It's all a bunch of gray maybes, but
Yep.
Fun.
Yeah, it can be.
Yep.
So for me, the way I interpreted this, and again, I admit that it could be wrong. It's just, play with the thought here, kids. The concept for me anyway always kind of resonated with how that you had a dream, say the night before or last week or whatever, but you can't remember. It's like just a few minutes after waking up, you can't even remember what it was about, which again, within the context of the Elder Scrolls world, doesn't really make sense. So for me, I kind of always viewed it as the inverse of that, is that when the gods are, quote, asleep, that's when they're kind of at their most knowledgeable and powerful. But then back in the waking world, which is still actually within the dream, it's kind of like, right, yeah, no, what's this again? They kind of forget some of what was going on in the metaphysical sense. Anyway, that's how I interpreted that.
When you bring it up that way, when you put it in those words, it makes me think of that bit of Vivec's dialogue in Morrowind where he explains what it's like to be a god. And says it wants like being awake and asleep at the same time. Awake, I'm here talking to you, but asleep, I'm very, very busy.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe it seemed kind of knows that would be what it's referencing.
Yeah.
And that's also probably where like my interpretation of it came from. Just like, oh, so it's kind of like when I wake up and I can't remember the dream I had, but in this case, it's the inverse. It's I wake up and I do remember the dream, but like no one's going to believe me. Like, I don't know. It's some kind of like, I can't even fully articulate it, but that's just kind of how it fit in my head.
Didn't Coleman write Vivec's dialogue?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I mean, there's if it had been Kirkbride, I would say, I think there's obviously a reference there, but because they're two different writers, they're not necessarily in the same mesh.
Yeah, not necessarily, but I think they probably had some agreement on.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
They might not have.
I just don't know that this part is intentionally referencing that bit of dialogue.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, then to make things more complicated, you get the next line, which is all motifs can be mortally wounded. And I kind of tried to meld the two of them together. Because I was trying to create some sort of a logical flow of thought.
Yeah.
And so
good luck with the Elder Scrolls.
Well, I suggested that Nirn is a motif. And considering that Nirn, you could say, is the motif of the conflict of two powerful beings, or the result of an enantiomorph, or etc.
I would take it even simpler. A motif, I mean, I looked it up just to be sure. A motif would be a pattern of some sort. That tells me stasis. That's order. It can be mortally wounded. That is the introduction of chaos. So once slain, order, the parts of order turn into the structure of future nostalgia. We remember those times when things were better.
Make Resdania great again.
And that's actually the next line, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but I would also even, and again, not to be, like contrarian or confrontational here, but I would even just view that in an arguably even more simple way. Like if a motif is a pattern, there's two ways to interpret that. It's like, a textile pattern. So it's like something very identifiable, that hence like Andrew's comment about rigidity, which is why I don't think it's necessarily wrong. But a pattern could also be cyclical. It can repeat. I mean, MC Escher did this rather famously for a while. It's why people still do the MC Escher stuff. And puppy time. Anyway, so for me, and Puppy's gone because Puppy no like me and Puppy no like Elder Scrolls lore. Okay. But for me, that's another way of looking at the concept of a motif or a pattern. The kind of, and the terrible violence began anew. It's all going back to cycles and stuff, which is kind of what the Elder Scrolls really shoves down our throat in a lot of the lore. And then it's, hey, the way you get out of that is to fundamentally break reality, hence the walking ways, walk at strange angles, do crazy stuff with like nuclear powered swords and all that shit that people have discovered and had fun with as concepts over the past decades. So for me, that's also another way of looking at pattern, is not just as stasis, but also something repeating, easily identifiable, and that in itself lends itself very well to the Elder Scrolls lore. And also Vivec talking about the wheel and wisdom from on high and floating golden god with the spear, like it tracks is all I'm saying.
I'm sorry, I've just received an alarm that there's going to be a horrible thunderstorm. This morning I got up and it was like, no rain, 0%. And now it's like, you gonna get it.
Damn.
It was a thunderbolt from a clear sky.
That's New England for you. You don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes.
Hey, we say that in Canada. Don't steal our shit.
They say it everywhere, dude. Do not abuse your powers or they will lead you astray. They will leave you like rebellious daughters. They will lose their virtue. They will become lost and resentful and finally become pregnant with the seed of folly. This is like a lot of like family issues happening here all of a sudden.
Yes.
Is Vivec talking about godliness, the powers of a god?
That's how I've read it. The whole bulk of this paragraph, that they will leave you like rebellious daughters, they will lose their virtue, they will become lost and resentful and finally become pregnant with the seed of folly.
They'll become whores.
Yeah.
Terrible whores.
Soon you'll be the grandparent of a broken state. You'll be mocked. It will fall apart like a stone that recalls it's really water. I've seen that as an argument to say that if you fail at CHIM, you zero sum, because this is because a lot of the motifs in this passage are talking about kind of being a state, being a city, which is all part of being a ruling king, and so it's using those statehood symbols to kind of push that home.
We haven't met Moloch Ball yet.
Nope.
Nope, that's the next sermon.
Because Kim hasn't been introduced yet, that's the only reason I think it's not talking about that.
Yeah.
I think he mentions it a few times in a roundabout way, but I mean, a lot of the being a ruling king has sort of been so conflagrated with CHIM in general that I think we kind of have a hard time. That was fast. Nice job, Tord.
Oh, bingo already?
Seriously?
And
record.
I think it's sort of I think it's kind of easy for us to take a lot of the 36 lessons and go, they're talking about CHIM.
Yes.
But I do kind of feel like this paragraph, while very symbolic and metaphorical, is also, I think it's the primary meaning is supposed to be talking about governing, and as a matter of fact, most of this chapter is about like running a kingdom. But because it's Vivec, the subtext, and it's not very the subtext is obviously about being a champion and also enlightenment and etc. Because I don't think Vivec really considers like just kicking a lot of ass to be a laudable goal.
That's actually something that brings up something that I've never thought before, but kind of fits now.
Context.
In order to become a ruling king, in the Walking Ways sense? Do you need to be a king in a temporal sense?
I wonder that myself. I'll put it to you this way: if you're, I think we can all probably agree that depending on how you're going about being a ruling king, even if you live in a tower by yourself, you could theoretically argue that you're a king of something. And there's like, you could use the metaphor of being a king of yourself, like you're ruling your mind and your soul and etc. There's a lot of, I mean, this is the metaphors get so friggin' thick here that it's kind of hard to. You could throw a rock and hit home, it doesn't, it doesn't really matter. Swing a cat and hit a good idea,
Yeah. I don't know. I think it kind of almost has to be something to do with the Walking Ways here, just because of how this paragraph is knitted together. Because you have the waking world is the amnesia of dream. All motifs can be mortally wounded, and then there's something that you can almost read as being talk about fascism and the whole once slain themes turn into the structure of future nostalgia. That's absolutely how what's the term? Not panegyric, ultra nationalism. Griffith's definition of fascism. I can't remember what it is, but it's the idea of fascism being the rebirth, the futuristic rebirth of a nostalgic form of nationalism, and
make
that
America great again.
Feels like that whole kind of structure of future nostalgia stuff, but then you get the command out of nowhere to do not abuse your powers or they will lead you astray, and then all of the consequences. So I kind of think they have to be tied together somehow, otherwise they shouldn't be a paragraph.
Use your powers responsibly, they could become doctors. Or even lawyers. Or even Dr. Lawyers.
I wonder if it might be tapping into because if you start abusing the power or the responsibility or the authority that you have, others begin to question the authority. That's how dictators kind of work. They go past what's reasonable and what's morally or reasonably acceptable, and they cross that line, and all of a sudden they have more enemies or something. I don't know. I'm just kind of exploring. Would you stop?
Grumble pup.
Oh goodness.
For those of you listening, the podcast was interrupted by Andrew's adorable new puppy who does not appreciate our content.
Like, mad I'm not giving her attention.
Yeah.
So like another thing for me that kind of sticks out about where we've taken the conversation and where the sermon has led us so far, which I mean we're only like a few fucking sentences in, but hey, this is what happens, baby. But
I don't think we're getting on to sermon 12 today. Sorry, folks.
Yeah.
No, but look, this is good, and I am gonna go somewhere with this. So with regards to several things that several people have already brought up in the past few minutes, Vivec's idea of Godhood is one that is compatible with the universe, but there are many other versions of Godhood. So Mana Marco and the Necromancer Moon, you have Draco Chrysalis, you have the people who are drowned lamps doing their shit, you have the various heroes acting or like getting ready for the cataclysmic fight to end all fights, waiting in the sands behind the stars in the far shores, up in the Great Mead Hall, up in Sovngarde, right? Like there's all kinds of people who still on some level are at the whims of even larger ancient cosmic forces. And I think that it's important to again recognize and crucially separate that it's not all CHIM. There's various different ways of going about this. So for example, how Tiber Septim behaves and how Vivec behave, though they are both ruling kings, and sure, like no ruling king can truly be a ruling king if they see in another their equal, but we can recognize as like outsiders looking in, oh, Vivec is a god, Tiber Septim is a god. but they started out as mortals and as non-playable characters. So how they go about their godhood is very different, but it's still valid. And so that is something that I want people to actually keep in mind with that regard, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be CHIM, and how one views or achieves godhood is not going to contradict how someone else achieves and views godhood. So to use another example, because I'm the Red Guard guy, think about how, like, you have Red Guard heroes. It's usually about fundamentally breaking something. It's the Pancratosaur that somehow sank Yokodo. It's like, the Pissy Heroders, like, they sank it because they were mad because they lost the war. Or, oh, Frandar Hunting was so brutal in his word, and that's why he went to go clear the way to Hammerfell, because he knew what was coming, right? Like, it's all about shit is broken, and we have to fundamentally break it to rebuild it anew, because our main god said, yeah, no, I'm not helping you, so fucking figure out your way off the dead skin ball, right? Tiber Septim is like, oh, hey, wait a second, the wheel. What if I maybe, like, even by force, because, like, I understand, reach heaven through violence. Well, then, baby, I'm just going to commit, like, literal fucking genocide across the continent and give the Altmer a brand new asshole in the shiny form of Numidium. Like, that's how he operates, whereas Vivec is more, I guess you could say, contemplative. Like, he's the warrior poet, right? So how they're going about these things and how they view the nature of existence and godhood is different, but it's not at odds with, I guess, what could arbitrarily be called the rules of this universe. So where I want to go with that, because I think it was you, Chris, or maybe it was you, James, who mentioned about, Vivec and the idea of statehood and wanting to become, first you need like a group of people, a tribe, a city, a state. Yeah, and like that's actually a really good way of looking at it. And to an extent, Tiber Septim, our other main guy, does this as well, where he unites, like, in a new way, Cyrodiil, and pushes for their empire to reach again, like, make Cyrodiil great again. Time for a new empire of man out of the heartland kind of thing, because Riemann had the good idea the first time. And so there's that concept with it as well. But what I want to expand upon with that concept that should be familiar to everyone, whether you're American, you're British, you're Canadian like me, what should be familiar to everyone is that in your mind exists an idealized version or some idealized understanding of the place you live, whether that's your hometown, your province, state, county, whatever it might be, your nation. There's an idea in your head of what this country is, which is why people will say, again, regardless of political stance, oh, this isn't us, this isn't America, Canada, Australia, Britain, New Zealand, etc. Or, oh, what happened to the country I used to know? Because in your head is an idea, and fundamentally, that's not actually what exists. It's your understanding of a single facet of the complex nature that is the society in which you occupy. So with that idea in mind of, like, you're representing a city or a state, etc., it also is way more complicated than that. And it also means that how people view that is going to be an idealized or, a kind of mentally crystallized version in your head versus what the actual reality is. And this is actually, in my opinion, very well reflected in Morrowind and how, like, the game and also just the province and how Vivec understands and sees godhood, because the Dunmer are very different from the houses to the Ashlanders to how they view, religion and spiritualism and the world. Like, sure, there's a unified idea of, like, yeah, look, we got this various shade of blue and gray color of our skin. We, generally speaking, worship our three living gods. And for the most part, we think slavery is cool, right? So, like, that's, the Dunmer, right?
Also, yay, bugs. Yeah.
But again, within that, there are, of course, differences. You had House Indral that absolutely could not handle the idea of, like, not being independent, and they killed themselves en masse. You had House Lalu, who, depending who you ask, are basically imperial foreign occupier collaborationists, right? You have all these different groups that try and focus on different aspects of one part of their, again, very diverse and varied culture. Sure, yeah, slavery is legal in Morrowind, but you also have people who are Dunmer actively fighting to end that. Does that necessarily mean that, that's the one true Morrowind, or is that, like, no, this isn't like the Morrowind I know it could be, because again, it's that idea that exists in their mind. So that is really what people should focus on, rather than say any kind of material notion of a state and a people. It's how the perception of that state exists within the greater cultural consciousness. And that's what I wanted to say about that.
I've got something exactly like this for the video that I'm writing a script for my OnlyFans, and it's literally exactly about this kind of stuff, about shared ideas and platonic truth and that kind of shit.
Hey, there you go.
Yep. And the kind of material you usually put on OnlyFans. And
Chris just starts it's like, yeah, so let me tell you about this.
but yeah. So let's see. Soon you will become the grandparent of a broken state. You will be mocked. They're all going to laugh at you. It will fall apart like a stone that recalls it is really water. This is a motif that we picked up in Sermon 5 of Say No Elegies for the Melting Stone. It's the idea of things turning into memory.
Yeah.
Plus, it's recalling that it's really water.
Mm-hmm.
It's remembering that it's water.
Yeah, I don't know if we're in agreement about elemental metaphors that seem to pop up. We know that water is memory. To my mind, stone means history. These are the things that happen.
I have thoughts on this, but yes, please continue.
Yeah. So a stone that recalls it is really water. That says it's history that's really just someone's telling of history. It's just the memory of what happened, which can be fallible.
The structure of future nostalgia.
The memory stones of the Yonsei.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have.
What? Spit it out.
No, Andrew first. I already went on a big rant.
No, I'm done.
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. So rant number 2 time. Okay, so sorry, folks. You accidentally signed up for a little bit of extra stuff with regards to Red Guards. So I again really like that little note in here about stone that's like forgotten its water, basically. There are many different sources, both in game and out of game, that tie memory and water and stone together as like kind of just all shared aspects of each other. A lot of people, let's be real, are likely familiar with the book On Wind and Sand from Skyrim that actively talks about sand is just the exposed aggregate and like the history and memory of the stone and like where it came from and its past. So there's that tying in, like Andrew said, of history, but also memory, the memory of like previous worlds that now has been exposed down to like the aggregate level, which you can infer is kind of like at the atomic or subatomic level if you want to get real scientific about it, which if you want. And then again, memory stones. Hey, how did we manage to get memory into a stone? And depending on who you ask, they're very shiny and glossy, almost like water. And you also have with the monomyth the very much implied notion that the knowledge or like the memory of all the worlds to come rested in the glimmer of Satak's scale. So it's kind of like scales like water, like waves, but also kind of stone-ish, shiny, glossy, stones like quartz crystals, maybe. Have some fun with it, be a hippie about it.
Gusher.
It's fine, but there's clearly lots of people, not just me, crucially, who are building connections between the idea of stone and memory. And on a completely unrelated tangent, the reason why the ocean is salty is because of all the minerals from the stone that have been worn away by erosion over millions upon millions of years. That's why the water is salty. So
also the tears from the casualties in the first Elnathay War.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course, yes. So sorry for forgetting about them. But never forget. But yeah, so if there's a hell, I'm burning in it.
Yeah.
But the main thing that I want to kind of get across to people is that the idea of playing with stone and memory and water and how they can behave or complement each other is very deliberately intentional. Case in point, just look at the concept of the far shores. And I mean, like, just to sound like a complete pedant about it, hey, look, water and shores. Shores are made of sand, which is the exposed aggregate of stone and the memory within. So the far shores sit at the edge of memory. It's self-preservation, and it's also a beach party. Fun, right? So, like, you can do that. That's perfectly valid. But again, there's clearly a connection, or various connections, between water and stone and memory. So if you want to also think about, say, maybe the earth bones is kind of like forming the structure, stone-like in a certain way. It gets a little hazy in that regard, but there's clearly also another connection you can make with that. I just want people to kind of play around with the concept a bit and see that it's not just me being like, a crazy man in the alleyway behind a dumpster talking about this stuff. Other people have made the connection of like, yeah, hey, stone is also, and like sands are also in a way kind of memory. There's also a book, I think it's either in forget if it's a Daggerfall book or Morrowind or Oblivion, but it's like some poet who's going around the Alakir desert, and it's talking about how the sand moves like waves, and with one gust of the wind will expose some ancient unknown temple, and then with another gust of wind it's covered again by the sand and condemned to memory once more. And it's like, ooh, I see what you did there. And like, that's an official book, right? So there's connections to be had. It's just like I want people to like this and appreciate this and play with it as much as I have. That's all I want to say. And Andrew's laughing at me. Sorry, no, James is laughing at me.
No, it's good. The connections are good. There's so much that you can sort of drag in there in terms of structure and fluidity or not, and kind of how things are put together. It's because it's. I think again, the first part of this paragraph talks about the fragility of ideas, which is echoing the whole all languages based on meat principle, where everything will die, everything will change. It's another expression of that sort of a thing, and so that's where you get the once slain themes turn into the structure of future nostalgia and so on. So it's all kind of things compositing, recompositing, breaking down, and all the rest of it. And those ideas being magnificently fluid, all in the process. It's I don't know whether you can necessarily call it crystal, because there's not all the same pictures, but now I want to go off on a time crystal tangent.
Easy.
No. which no. I think we should probably get to Yagner's point that he's been talking about in chat. That he's been saying that. Talking about being pregnant with the seed of folly and eventually growing rebellious daughters. Is that foreshadowing for Vivec's 8 children with Molag Bal?
Could be.
It could also be 8 children. 8 is a significant number in terms of the Aedra. So.
Well, it was Kirkbride said that he thought of it as the parts of yourself that you have to kill in order to purify yourself to become divine.
Yeah. Although, hang on, sorry, maths wise, it's not 8, it's 9, because I was convinced that it was for a long while that it was the Daedric princes that weren't part of either the Good Daedra or the House of Troubles, because 9 minus 16 minus 9 is 7. But it doesn't work. They don't all map close enough for it to be something like that. But yeah, that's a tangent. But it's an interesting idea to think of that as one of the first steps to be the ruling kings. The idea of you having to kind of slay and master yourself as one of the first steps. That absolutely makes sense. But
ego death.
Yes.
Yeah.
And anyway. The next line, keep nothing in your houses, neither needed nor beautiful, is an easy one. It's a reference to William Morris. The quote, the actual quote being, have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful.
I was sure it was some kind of proto-Jordan Peterson thing, but...
but it's a... but its position is important because it comes at the end of a paragraph about, don't fuck around with the power you have, and and it's sort of like, trimming the weeds of Veloth, that kind of thing. It's about, like, a lot of what Vivec encourages to be a ruling king is trim the fat, get lean and muscular and, and capable, because it's going to be that's the sword of the first half of the life.
Do you think the Morag Tong factors into that?
Yeah, the Forest Clan. Yeah, I think that's what the Morag Tong were probably supposed to be when they started. I don't think that the Morag Tong that we see in Morrowind is supposed to be the way the guild is supposed to operate. Pretty sure Halalu kind of fucked them up, but
yeah.
I mean,
Then again, you just have the sort of like secret subquest near the end of that quest line, though. But
are you talking about
still,
Am I talking about what?
Is that Threads of the Web Spinner you're talking about, Felix?
Yeah. But
Um,
also, just like what James was saying about, like, kind of Jordan Peterson. I'm sorry, but I just can't get out of my mind Jordan Peterson as a Dunmer being like, if you can't keep your room or your temple clean, you have no right to talk about Almsby in any capacity. Like, just, I could actually see it, and it's dumb, it's terrible, it's stupid, but it amuses me.
I did try and look it up, see whether there was something like that in one of the 12 rules, but I think it's actually closer to the whole kind of, does that X bring you joy or whatever from the...
does it spark joy? Yeah.
I can't remember. I can't remember who was
Marie
responsible
Kondo
for
in
that.
the depths
That's it.
of
Marie Kondo. Yeah.
Marie Kondo in the depths of Red Mountain, looking at the heart of Lorkhan. This sparks
joy. Yeah. Ordeals you should,
folks. If there's a hell, I'm burning in it.
Yeah.
One other thing I will say about the Morag Tong and like the concept of the Foresters Guild. First, because I'm just kind of on a roll. Meme-worthy time. Imagine if they were like a bunch of Canadian lumberjacks. They're like, oh yeah, hey, like you gotta cut down that tree over there in Pelagiad, eh? And like admittedly, that'd be kind of funny. But on a more serious note, beyond the concept that objectively is horrifying of state-sanctioned murder, and you just basically, like, you pull up like Lucius Cornelius' cell and be like, yeah, no, I have a permit, and it just says I can do whatever the fuck
I can do whatever I want. Yeah.
that's definitely really messed up and scary on the surface of it. But again, you kind of take a step back and big picture it. It's like, do you want to deal with corruption and excess decadence and like too much sleazy underbelly stuff, or do you want like a kind of state-sanctioned hit squad that, again, crucially in theory, right, would actually try and uphold the ideals of the people in the country and be like, yeah, no, this person, maybe not kill them, but oh yeah, no, you're definitely going to jail, or you're being put away for a long time, or you're being exiled, something like that. Just kind of like, you are clearly a harm, and the like powers that be have decided that you need to go. Now, of course, in an idealized setting, there's a part that's kind of like, oh, that'd be kind of nice. But in terms of how people and cultures actually operate, oh God, that is horrifying. Please do not ever do that. That is nightmarish. Do not entertain this idea for real. But that's kind of the idea, though, behind the Morag Tong, which from an Elder Scrolls perspective is like, yeah, okay, that's kind of neat and would make sense for the state to have in some capacity. But yeah, like not exactly a good, wholesome, family-friendly faction we're talking about.
Well, it's
a spin on the idea of the state as the source of the monopoly on violence. But anyway, we'll get to that when we talk about the Treasurewood sword. I think we probably diverged enough on that, but yeah.
Us diverging? What?
Nah.
No,
tangents never.
That's literally our job. Ordeals you should face unimpeded by the world of restriction.
Tangents never.
We have I've mentioned the Metaphysics of Morrowind blog pretty often, and they kind of make a meal out of it, out of this one, which is It's juicy, I have to say. And I like the idea that Vivec is kind of telling, the Hortator to just, do whatever the hell it is you have to do. You can't. But it also sort of it also kind of reminds me of the argument of like in mythology, everything that a hero does is good because it's the hero doing it. Which is a great idea if you're not talking about real life. And but anyway. So Vivec goes on to explain that the splendor of stars is Iam's domain. This is, again, sort of the Nuit kind of thing for Iam. The selfishness of the sea is Set's. I rule the middle air. All else is earth and under your temporal command. Which, again, it's temporal, not temporary. So this sort of suggests the idea that the earth and unlike the sea and the air and the stars, is governed by time. And I think what Vivek's kind of implying here is that this is that when Z talks about the Earth, it's about things of the Earth. In other words, mortal, temporary things that can die.
I would bring in the next two sentences in that there is no bone that cannot be broken except for the heart
bone.
I've heard the theory, and I kind of subscribe to it, but the idea that when the heart was launched into Resdane and it formed the stone of Red Mountain, that caused a linearity between Adamantia and Red Mountain, which is what trapped Akatosh into a linear state. Is now forced to travel between 2 points, which is a line.
The two opposite sides of Tamriel is what you're thinking of.
Yeah. And add in the idea that Lorcan and Akatosh are really the same entity, but psychopomps of each other. Then, the material world is the domain of time because time and space are inseparable. Is what that makes me think of. I didn't arrive at that until I heard you talking about the temporal.
Hang on.
I do want to suggest that time and space I think are inseparable in the Elder Scrolls universe. I think that's kind of how it's written into. But every once in a while, I would encourage people just to see if it comes up with any interesting ideas, is to consider possibility that it isn't.
We do know for a fact that they used a quantum mechanics textbook in world building from Morrowind. Like this is on record. I think it was the Polygon article for like the 20th anniversary or whatever.
This is why you got to be big brained for the lore, people. But so okay, hang on, Andrew, and everyone else listening and hearing the cast and everything. I forget, but isn't there like some book or like an out of game source, like maybe it's on Imperial Library or something, that talks about the nature of Akatosh and the world and the continent? So like Akavir, Rise in the East, it's like the dragon's wings is spreading open in the dawn of possibility. Tamriel, where we are now is like the present, and Yokuda is representing the past. And so these are three aspects of time and the time dragon, and thus cyclical in nature.
That was originally a Reddit thread somewhere that I think Kirkbride said was an interesting idea, and then everyone suddenly seized on it as truth. Because MK said something about it.
Right. But, I'm just saying, so like that's a thing that like I know has definitely been out like floating in the community for a while now. Andrew raised something that made me realize kind of touches on the same aspect. So 3 to maybe even 4 towers, depending how you want to view Snowthroat. You have, or like, actually, you know what? Yeah, let's actually just focus on the towers that in some fashion involve Akatosh. You have the Adamantine or the Adamantia Tower in Daggerfall, where that's where convention happened, and they all decided, okay, here's what existence is going to be. We're going to sacrifice ourselves for it. And that's just going to kind of be the way of things. And then you have the white gold tower, built in mimicry of that tower, also located in the very heartland of the continent. Then you have Red Mountain, which was created because Lorcan's heart was basically like, ha ha ha, I pulled the trick on you. So they launched it across the freaking continent, and it rose up. And so, and also like how this applies to, like, you know, the CHIM or the Kymel Adabal diamond, you know, is like the crystallized blood from Lorcan that fell on top of the tower, and that's why it's important and upholds the bears and blah 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 blah. So in our own way, with these three towers that involve Akatosh to some extent, we also have representations of the past, the present, and the future. You have the past in terms of, okay, here's convention, here's what happened, and that's kind of a thing now. Like, it's still a tower, okay, great. That's not the focus anymore. Now we're in the present, and like by present, I mean basically like late third era and fourth era and stuff like that. So we're now in the present, where a lot of the games are taking place, where it's revolving around Cyrodiil and the actions and machinations of people, and around the white gold tower. Then you also have, of course, this tower, which, yes, it's a Lorcanic tower, but if you want to think about time and space, kind of, you know, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey shit, they're kind of just kind of the same entity to an extent. It still involves Akatosh in some capacity, and again, it represents change, which, if again you want to look at that, you know, Reddit post or whatever it was that started it, of, you know, the future of vacuum, it's like representing change and possibility. That's the same, like, you know, the future is unknown, it's unwritten, there's opportunity there, there's change there, and it's there in Red Mountain, and it's the third tower that Akatosh has to fucking deal with, or had some hand in its creation or running effectively as a tower. So that, again, is kind of another way of how that, you know, neat idea, again, not saying it's true or not, but just another way in which that is reflected on an even smaller scale in the game world that we know. So that's just something that I wanted to bring up, that Andrew's comment made me realize, like, oh, hey, wait a second. Hey. So yeah, thank you for that, Andrew.
Well, maybe that's an idea, because we know that Lorcan has seen the tower that is the Arabis. And that's kind of the basis for a lot of what he did. So I am wondering whether the idea of the creation of, or suddenly that whether the creation of Adamantia and Red Mountain, particularly, or any Adric towers really, are created as a reflection of those, in the same way that the Moorish towers are reflections of Adamantia. That there is that kind of purposiveness in building the towers, and the way that kind of brings temporality and brings reality by reflecting reality back. I just total side thought that occurred while Felix was saying stuff, but yeah.
Well, the whole idea that Akatosh is stretched between two or more points from Adamantia. I heard that idea from on Facebook, Skylar, formerly known as Cody. I don't remember her last name, but she had said something on a comment, and it made a lot of sense to me, because it had to do with Akatosh being trapped in the hole of Lorcan's heart and Coda, when we see the dragon furled up in there. It was all thematically connected. So I don't want to take credit for that theory, because it's definitely not mine. It's just one that I think has some merit.
It's the House of We for a reason, baby.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So there is no true symbolism of the center. I think we are probably on board with that.
Before we move on, though, I do want to point out that just maybe the obvious thing, that the heart bone is the heart of Lorcan.
Yeah.
And this is kind of this is suddenly turning to directly address just Nerevar. You will see it twice in your lifetimes. Is Nerevar seeing it?
And the Nerevarine,
yeah, and then the Nerevarine afterwards.
Well, and I mean, even the UESP links bones and heart bone to the LFA and Heart of Lorcan, respectively.
Okay, sorry, hang on. I just had terrible thought. The throat
Is this you going to be burning in the special hell again?
Heart bone. Stop it. The heart bone's connected to the leg bone.
So there's
I know,
no.
Andrew's shaking your head. I know, I'm a terrible person.
I need to construct a siege weapon, some kind of ballista.
Mhm.
Launch a rock from here to
Into Canada.
Felix.
Mhm.
You know what? It's probably at
No.
that point cheaper to just hire a Starlink satellite to crash into my town.
I just mail you a rock. You can hit yourself in the head with it.
Send it to PO Box. Blah blah blah. There you go. But sorry, like I just like the heartbone, and then it just reminded me of that terrible song.
I hate you so much right now.
Yeah.
Love you too, buddy.
If it's taller than it's wide, it's phallic. If it's taller than it's wide, it's yeah. There you go.
And dick jokes already. This is like, yeah, we should absolutely have bingo already. Come on now.
Yeah.
Why?
So I think we're all on board with there's no true symbolism of the center. We kind of understand what's going on there. It's the sort of the way that Nirn or Mundus was built is establishing Oblivion as a center. And because you can't, the center is always chaotic, you can't, there's no truth to it because you can't intrinsically limit it. The Sharmat will believe that there is. He will feel that he can cause years of exuberance from sitting in the sacred, which really no one can leave that state and cause anything more but strife. That last one's a little complicated.
Yeah, I don't like the grammar.
That sounds to me like I will guarantee that line is the basis of the anti-CHIM.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, of the anti-CHIM argument, yeah. And it's a good argument. And
I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but it's cool.
But it's a good argument, yeah.
Yeah. And you can also, because that relies on the idea of the center being the self,
right.
Which isn't
For
necessarily true.
those in chat or listening in the future who aren't familiar with this idea of anti-CHIM, so it's thought that Vivec attained CHIM.
Mm-hmm.
I am all are we. It is we are all unified. We are one, and there is no center. We're all together. The house of we.
I am the universe, and and the universe includes all of us.
Yes. And then anti-CHIM, the idea is that Dagoth the Sharmat, took the idea of CHIM and kind of flipped it on its head. So instead of I am all are we, it's I am all are me.
Mm-hmm.
All of you are just aspects of me. I am the center, and you are all extensions of myself.
Which is... Yeah, well, I was gonna say that's exactly what the corpus disease is it's the Sharmat stretching out his house to to absorb everything into himself, and
and so it seems to me this line may have source of that. There is no symbolism of the center. The Sharmat will believe there is himself. He will feel that he can cause years of exuberance from sitting in the sacred, which if I remember seeing a post about Dagoth one time talking about states of awakeness and death, and how Dagoth is in a unique position that way, being both dead and awake instead of dead and asleep like all other dead people are.
Which is something that Vivec points out, that when Vivec talks about being awake and then being asleep and then waking up, for Dagoth to constantly be sleeping, it's an imbalance in a Jungian sense of spending too much time. You know, like you can't one of the things that Jung cautioned against with spiritual exploration is that you should spend time working on that, but you should also spend time paying your bills and going to work. And it's necessary to keep yourself grounded in. It's the reason why Buddhists don't meditate 24 hours a day. You have to eat. You have to get up and walk around. These are things you have to do.
Unless you're one of those monks who's still sitting inside a Buddha statue, still meditating.
No, then you're dead.
That's not fair.
All right.
I agree, they're dead, but it's meditation. There's also, I've heard
fossilization if you do it right. I seem to remember.
Oh
yeah, that horrifying thing where they not fossilization, but like self mummification.
That's the word. They eat like certain roots or whatever.
Certain roots and chemicals and teas, and then they like apply certain ointments and stuff, and like you can actually see some of the results. They're quite horrifying to look at, because it's really
they did it to themselves.
do that.
Yeah,
while you're alive, and incredibly excruciatingly painful. Which again, sorry to kind of derail the conversation for a hot second, but like the core thing in Buddha, and again, because I'm me, I remember reading like a kind of kids comic about Buddha that came from India, about like the story of Siddhartha Gautama and how he became the Buddha. And it's like his whole thing was about, going from one extreme, the life of luxury, being a prince secluded in a palace, to joining up with like a bunch of ascetic Hindu monks, just being like super extreme, like, oh yeah, life is suffering, this is so good. It was like, I feel like both of these are kind of wrong. And then he used the metaphor again, music related, of tuning a string. Too loose, it won't produce the right tone. Too tight, the string will break at the first strum. But when it's perfectly right, in harmony, in balance, then the tune, the lovely melody will come forth, and it's not going to break, it's not going to be flat. That is the middle way, right? So it's not about extremes. Like, to put it very simply, Buddhism is theoretically the like view of centrism as like the end goal and like the proper correct way of doing things. So some of these dudes and like Buddhist monks were like, no, must be like even more extreme. It's like, did you not internalize the message? My God, like I got this from a comic book about the guy. Like there's clearly, to me anyway, something kind of disconnected from got to be super extreme with the meditating and like self mummify and be inside a statue. It's like, dude, it's literally there in how the dude became the Buddha that's not the right thing to do. Like, just why? Anyway, that's my little tangent.
You give two people the same sentence and they'll interpret it different ways. So
yeah, it's like that Friends meme with Joey and what's her face. Do not do the opposite thing. Like, oh God, all right. Well, getting back to Dagoth the bit where it's talking about him sitting in the sacred, I've heard that Dagoth is projecting himself from the dream sleeve because he's dead and awake, so he's dreaming the real physical world, and so being in the dream sleeve would be the sacred. But it could also be whatever bastardized provisional house that Dagoth has access to, as a path of divinity for,
or just being close to the heart of Lorcan.
Sitting in the crater of Red Mountain could, absolutely.
You could also just be thinking of it as like just the concept of CHIM, or just the greater awareness of the concept of the dream and the Godhead. Like, sure, the Sharmat is different in the sense of I am the Godhead and everything is me, as opposed to, I'm a part of the Godhead, but also still me. This is fascinating. And then, oh wait, what? I have God powers now? Cool.
Hey.
Yay. So that to me could also be another way of viewing that as sitting in the sacred. But I also like Andrew's idea of just like, again, being close to the heart of Lorcan, the doom drum, the rhythm, enter a trance, like state of like, oh yeah, send the corpus. This is correct. Like I get it.
Yeah, like sunbathing with the heart over there, and he's got like his little mirrors.
Just like reflecting off the lava pools, like got to even this out. Do Dumber then tan like more blue, more gray? Do they tan purple?
Imagine they just get like darker gray.
Yeah. They just
like
get more angry.
Steak. All right.
There is once more the case of the symbolic and barren. The true prince that is cursed and demonized will be adored at last with full hearts. One expects this is the Nerevarine. I expect this is the Nerevarine because it's been, like the cursed and demonized at the beginning of when they start reincarnating, and then eventually, and also at the beginning of the game, you the game itself, you get because outlawed.
You start as essentially no one, and then you start the path of the Nerevarine. You're demonized, and House Indoril comes after you, and and the people won't talk to you because you're the false Nerevarine or whatever.
Yeah, I remember that was a very rough part of the game for me because it was also very reflective of the period of my life that I was going through. And I'm like, man, whoever wrote this game clearly had access to my life, and I don't fucking like it.
And then once you finally prove yourself, you are like if you finish the game, you can walk up to random NPCs and they're like starstruck. Are you?
Yeah.
Wolverine?
Oh my God, it's you. I just want to say thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
The far
Which was
cry
a nice
from all the, let's not make this official. Yeah.
No, but again, it was like, that one period in the game where it's like, all right, got to go to Vivec for various quest-related purposes. Got to load up on all the potions, repair my armor, and then like 50 dead ordinators later, it's like, Papa's tired.
Yep. According to the codes of Buffalo, there could be no official art, only fixation points of complexity that will erase from them the awe of the people given enough time. This is like a really kind of like skeptical, but at the same time it rings very true. The skeptical view of pop culture. The idea that the people of your country are never going to be satisfied with the same thing, and that you've got to constantly switch it up and keep it new and keep them entertained, otherwise they're going to get very, very angry. And and
you also can't define what art is. Art either is or it is not. It's not for someone to just stamp something with an art label.
Well, there was
you can't do that.
There was an expression in ancient Rome, I think it was, of bread and blood, that the average citizen is it
bread
Greek?
And circuses.
Yeah, panem et circenses. It was by which just is Latin for bread and circuses or bread and games.
Oh right, bread and games. That's it.
Yeah, like actually, like games is probably the more accurate translation to like what it is, because when we think of circus, we think of like clowns and stuff. In Rome, it was more like the horse chariot races and like gladiatorial combat. That was circenses. But
was it Caesar?
That was I forget. Maybe James or someone else might know. Was that by the poet Virgil, or like the historian Virgil, or a different Roman?
We have Yagna Stormskull saying it was Augustus, but I
okay.
couldn't tell you.
No, I think it was like some Roman emperor, but in any case, it's not really that important. Just the concept of
is
the people could be placated with like the what was like known as the grain dole, where every Roman citizen was basically not like a super wealthy person. Was given like a ration of grain or bread to like meet their basic, food needs. And, like so long as the people have, some kind of sustenance and some kind of entertainment, doesn't matter what goes on, how many losses the Roman Empire takes, how much corruption there is, how many civil wars or conflicts there may be, blatant disregard for rules and tradition, doesn't matter so long as the proles, or in this case the plebes, the plebeians, so long as they are entertained and have full stomachs, Rome can do whatever the fuck it wants.
Yeah.
And so this has been seen retroactively as like, oh yes, that's why Rome fell, especially the Western Roman Empire, which again, kind of like that should tell people the bit of the disconnect that that's not actually true, because it's like, hey, wait a second, that if that's why the Western Roman Empire fell, then why did the Eastern Roman Empire continue for like another near goddamn millennia? There is a question for people, but it's a popular imagination, and the idea that we also see reflected now is like, they got you distracted with, media and the culture war and all the stuff that doesn't matter. And so that's why, like, they get away, and they being, the deep state get
the
away
deep state.
with all
Yep,
this
exactly.
stuff, right? That's how it's kind of been now like reappropriated in the modern era. But that was a very popular thing back in Rome, like, Rome, aka the state, can basically do whatever it wants so long as it meets the very basic needs of its people, which are food and entertainment, at least as the Romans saw it. So
yeah, and Clock Blocker's pointing out that that there are people out there who are now tired of hearing about the Ukraine conflict, and just wish that it would just resolve itself and we could move on or something. And it's like that. I wish it would.
Attention spans, because of the internet, are so frighteningly short now. It's like,
I don't think they've ever been.
Exists for a week and then it's done.
I don't think they've ever been good, to be honest with you. I don't think the internet's done that. I think it's demonstrated it very clearly, but I don't think people's attention spans have ever been bad.
Well, let's
or
take
good, for that matter.
we take the
I'm not
Uvalde
sure.
situation
Mhm.
for a second. I mean, how many people still talk about Uvalde?
Hardly any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's
I mean,
that's the ploy for all school shootings, is just
and
dodge around it,
well,
say
also-
it's not an appropriate time to talk about this, and blah blah blah, mental health, etc. And then
Yeah.
eventually it'll go out of the news cycle, and you'll have an opportunity to, not do anything.
Yeah. Although counterpoint
Mhm.
to suggest that it is possibly the internet. For those of us in the UK listening, if I say the name James Bulger to you, if you were alive in the 90s,
Mhm.
this was a kid who was basically taken down to the rail tracks by two slightly older kids. I think he was about 6 or 7 or so, and this was a couple of 12-year-olds, nearly teenagers, who basically just stoned him to death with bricks.
Jesus.
And
were those two kids trying to commit the perfect crime? Am I thinking of the same situation?
I don't know why they did what they did. That hasn't really that didn't really stick. But I remember the trial for that was in the news for weeks,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and I was an aware enough 8-year-old or however old I was that I was just so sick of hearing about James Bulger.
Mhm.
And just, can we move on, please?
Mhm.
And Madeleine McCann is possibly another contemporary example, if that's, again, registering at all. That,
Yeah, I remember that name.
Rich white small child goes missing.
Yeah.
John Benet Ramsey.
John Benet Ramsey in the U.S. Yep. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll have some
Yep.
things that stick, generally involving children, that will stick around. But I think social media has done something to make those narratives less permanent than they are in the imagination. Because even Madeleine McCann, I think, was it was pre-mobile internet. Certainly, it definitely wasn't pre-internet.
Well, but
I remember people complaining about it on Facebook.
Yeah, and I don't. That's what I'm saying is I think people say like, oh, everybody's got their heads in their phones these days, but I remember very clearly from the 80s that like before everybody had phones, everybody had books and magazines and newspapers and shit, or just staring off into space or whatever. It wasn't like I'm just kind of saying that it's people change less than you'd think, but they do change, but just less than you'd think.
I see what you're saying, and I don't disagree. Like it's the same reason why, like, the refrain of "no one wants to work anymore." Like someone compiled.
Yeah, it's
that
always
list,
been.
like this.
I'm from
this
the
is
Slacker
literally, like,
generation. I got that
centuries
shit.
old. The idea of,
Yeah,
like, kids don't respect their elders these days. Ancient Greeks have been talking about that.
They wear
right?
their hair long.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I agree that, in that sense, the more things change, the more things stay the same. What I think has changed, sort of like find a more middle ground between what you and Andrew are saying, to kind of also not necessarily back up, but it's definitely something that I guess hold true to. Is that it's not so much that like things have changed and that like we still had like just a deluge of stories and news in the past, depending on what we had access to. The problem right now with the modern day and the internet is that right now on the internet, everything is so dictated by the algorithm that stuff rises and drops at like the drop of a needle, right? It's just so much more sudden, and there's also more access to stuff that, based on what you're interacting with, is what the algorithm then puts towards you. TikTok is actually, it has a phenomenal algorithm where, like, my sister, she loves TikTok because it gives her exactly what she wants. She wants some commentary and a lot of great, like wholesome, cute fashion tips and like fashion style things and like cute animals, and that's it. And the algorithm somehow knows exactly what she wants. Whereas for others, it's kind of definitely more like, like, and this is why you'll see it, and why the idea of like, what's trending is, it's actually what's trending locally for you. Someone in Tennessee is going to get a different top trending list than me, right? But it's like, it's the algorithm, is we're trying to find and perfect everything for everyone. And so I think that's what's fundamentally changed things for me, and why it does feel like everything just kind of rises and falls and goes by so quickly. It's like a lot of people right now are mad about, HBO Max getting rid of a ton of content creation off of their sites. But like, are we going to be talking about this 3 weeks from now? Probably not. Like you guys were saying about Ukraine, you're like, oh geez, that's kind of been going on a while. We don't want to hear about that anymore. And like, the Uvalde shooting, like it's all these things. And like, we're going to hear about the midterms for a while. And there's going to be, kind of aftermath about the midterms, and then it's going to disappear, and no one's going to do any analysis for it, except for maybe like 1 or 2 op-ed pieces in a large established legacy media chain. So, it for me, that's what's kind of changed things. Like now everyone is so enamored with the idea of the algorithm, and like, what, oh dear algorithm god, what say you, what be our search engine optimization today? Like that's how it feels. And that for me is a fundamental difference than anything that we've seen before in humanity. Not that we've had different necessary attention spans, but like the algorithm, it changes things for me. That's just my view on that. And so anyway, back to Elder Scrolls.
Nightbot just vanished. That's weird.
Yep.
So this is a secret that hides another. An impersonal survival is not the only way of the ruling king. Is not the way of the ruling king, excuse me. Embrace the art of the people and marry it, and by that I mean secretly have it murdered, which is one of my favorite lines.
Okay, kind of telling on yourself there, buddy.
It's
Does your wife know you think that?
yes.
Oh jeez. All right. Okay.
Because and I go into this on the New Whirling School. So the so in the metaphorical sense, I say a ruling king has to learn by a direct interaction with what his people are interested in, and then ensure that its availability by embracing it, by marrying it. If the people want gladiator fights, marry that bloodlust by building an arena in Vivec City. If they want skooma, marry their addiction by loosening legal restrictions and trade embargoes. If they want red around glassware pots, marry their obsession by releasing limited edition ruling king engraved glassware pots TM. But in order to continue the cycle of mutating obsession, you must also have these things murdered. Murder your arena by introducing a fixing scandal. Murder the skooma trade by introducing a new, more powerful drug into the black market. And murder those pots by dropping prices until the exclusivity is neutralized.
Yeah,
That way it dies, and you can move on to the next thing.
And this is also an expression of kind of Mephala, the whole kind of sex, and murder stuff as well. Hence the connection with the codes of Mephala. I also kind of feel obliged to point out that I'm fairly certain that in French, a slang term for orgasm is a little death.
Yes.
Yes,
Le petit mort.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you talk about the consummation of a marriage happening on the wedding night. So you have a marriage, you have sex, and you have murder and death all in the same.
And let's not forget
cycle.
Let's not forget that Almalexia was there at the red moment.
And the same act. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
also, I mean, I kind of read
Coming
it
to a new HBO drama series. Yeah.
I read it more like you become so much a part of the culture. You seep yourself in it to the point where you can begin to maneuver it. And you can take the culture and you can begin to drive it in a certain direction.
Right. Yeah, if it's useful, I mean, it's the typical political theater here in the United States. 3 months roughly before an election, you're going to see a huge amount of news about all the candidates who are running, and just before the next presidential election, assuming that Trump is still eligible to run, there's going to be another resurgence of horrible things that we've discovered that Trump has done, and you can set your watch to it. Because you have to do it 3 months ahead, because if it's longer than 3 months, people will get sick of the news cycle, and if it's less than 3 months, it doesn't have full market penetration.
All hail the algorithm.
All hail the algorithm. The ruling king that season another his equivalent rules nothing. This is, I mean, it's pretty obvious here. If you're not the only show in town, then you're not a show.
Yes, and it's also important that this is said in Sermon 11.
Yes, which is the number of the master and the two towers. Yes.
It's
Tolkien time. What?
So we're back to the next lines. We're back to the secret of. We're back to weapons and language. We're back to the word and the sword.
Yes.
The secret of weapons is this: they are the mercy seat. So the mercy seat is tough. Here's the thing about the mercy seat. The origination of the term is translated from, or the original Hebrew, which was a term assigned to the throne that they built on, as I understand it, on top of the Ark of the Covenant. Which allowed God to descend from wherever heaven is and manifest on earth. Yep. And that's the only way that apparently that God was allowed to actually physically arrive on earth. I think that possibly it's being used here to suggest that the secret of weapons is that they are a throne, sort of, on which you can sit. Yeah, right. It's a spotty connection I made here.
I think I would connect it more to mercy than to the seat, because quite apart from anything else, the phrase that's translated mercy seat, I've also seen it translated as throne of judgment or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a decision point. And it's a place where the one who has the power to decide sits, which links to the whole idea of, I'm sure I remember someone on this cast saying somewhere about Almalexia is the strongest of the three tribunes because she's mercy. You cannot have mercy on someone that you have not defeated. Weapons are the seat of mercy because they are what allow you to have mercy, because they are what allow you to defeat someone. Is the logic chain I get to.
I was thinking more along the lines of death is a mercy, in the physical, because I mean, if we go back to Buddhism, I know there's a sect of Buddhism that ascending from the mortal cycle of birth, death, and rebirth is the apex of Buddhist enlightenment, right? To reach nirvana is to recuse yourself from that cycle, and everyone's trying to escape this cycle. So to help them, because life sucks, you kill them. Now it's not your problem anymore. Something like that. I mean, also spotty, but that's what I thought about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, Johnny is demanding a Resdane Game of Thrones. Yes, it needs to happen.
Yeah. On a side note about weapons and kindness, that just reminded me of a Florida man story of this dude who said, "I'm going to kill you with kindness," and he apparently named his machete Kindness. I'm like, hey, Florida man, yeah.
Johnny also pointed out that only the strong have the luxury of mercy, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah, I like that connection.
Mercy is a demonstration of strength. Yep.
And what James was talking about, that you can have mercy upon those you've defeated. That's really good.
Well, yeah, I mean, hell, that's where the term mercy actually comes from. It's French for merci, thank you. Thank you for sparing my life, or at least that's the popular notion of where it came from like, middle-aged chivalry and stuff like that. So again, it all ties into that aspect of, I could totally kill you right now, but because I am merciful, I'm electing not to.
So much better than you.
Yeah.
So
Everyone
much
talk
better
about
than
how
you.
much better I am than other people.
There's a French concept. Anyway, so the secret of language is this: it is immobile. Okay, so the thing about it is, a lot of what Vivec says about language in other sermons doesn't really work with the idea of it being immobile.
It seems a weird.
If any, maybe that it because language, if anything, does adjust, it changes, and it could be said to be alive. Vivec also says that all language is based on meat.
I mean, maybe it's the words that, like, if you are not present somewhere for the language to exist. It can't exist there.
Maybe it could also be that it's just that maybe the metaphor is not really holding up because it could be that words are just words. Maybe what I was thinking was what I was thinking was that Vivek saying that it's immobile in the respect that it's not able to it's not as effective, I think, is kind of the that language is not something you can use to fight with because of how malleable and
a warrior poet.
Right. Well, but warrior is the part that fights. Poet is not. See what I mean? I'm thinking maybe that it's possible to read too much into this, and that's the mistake I'm making. Is that
that's
So anyway, I've been puzzling that line for years, and I've still haven't really gotten anywhere. I haven't been doing it the whole time, thankfully, but it's still it's still something that I still scratch my head about every time I see it. I can't quite work it out. Yeah, unless you've got unless you've got Thum, in which you have literal word knives.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of stupid. What if it's a self-referential thing? Secret language is this. It is immobile because we can't get anywhere with that phrase.
It's just a terrible play on words. Yeah, maybe.
It's literally just MK fucking with us.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah, it just seems to deny the very idea of a semantic range, which is no.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
the ruling king is armored head to. Oh, this is a good one.
Based on meat, and like the tongue is literally a piece of meat, and it's what determines a lot of our language and how we speak.
Also, Nordic.
Yeah. The ruling king is armored head to toe in brilliant flame. I think we've covered flame and like the idea of fire. The fire is mine, etc.
To make room for the fire, Vivek.
He is redeemed by each act he undertakes. This is another. I think I don't. Do I mention this? Yes. This is a little bit about like Nietzsche's Übermensch, and then the idea of like the hero in a myth, in a story, is always everything he does is good because he's the hero. It's the hero who does it. That kind of thing.
Yes.
His death is only a diagram back to the waking world. He sleeps the second way. This is all. I think this is all. These are all metaphors for Vivek talking about. Well, I mean, what in the way direction my head goes is the metaphysics of Morrowind direction, in which case his death is only a diagram back to the waking world means reload your save game. I mean, that's
it's a very famous article or like opinion piece back in the day of like, oh, CHIM is actually just the recognition that you're in the video game, and it's like close.
Yeah. It's the same thing goes with he sleeps the second way. It's really hard to. Like, why? What? Like, I don't know what the hell that is.
He cuts, slits in battle to pull like new. I mean, somewhere like there's something like that, right? Like it does kind of feel very
sleep
much
souls
like
in combat.
I'm gonna pause mid-fight, eat 50 cheese wheels and a health potion, and go back to fighting, and no one's none the wiser, right?
Yeah. UESP apparently links that line directly back to CHIM, which I do not think is accurate.
I don't like that either. But I do think, I mean, going back to that phrase from Vivek's dialogue I mentioned earlier, in like one of the first sentences, when he says, when I die, it's like falling asleep. All I have to do is choose to wake again. I mean, the Sharma is his double, and therefore you wonder if you rule nothing.
Which which is back to the original point of this sermon, which is that the ruling king who sees in another his equivalent sees nothing, and it's the idea of the.
Would the ruling king then in this entire, I don't want to call it a paragraph, but this chunk here is the ruling king supposed to be the Hortator? Because we know the Sharma and the Hortator are one and one.
Yeah, 100%.
Yes, this sermon is a lesson for the Hortator to become a ruling king, and so he's saying, right, if you want to be a ruling king, the Sharmat is your double. Deal with it.
Whereas below, we haven't gotten there yet. When it says, God is armored head to toe with terror. Oh yeah.
We'll get there. Hortator and Sharmat, 1 and 1, 11, and an elegant number. Which of the ones is more important? Which of the ones is more important? Which of the ones is more important?
Look at us in our numerology.
Yeah. Which of the ones is more important? Could you ever tell if they switch places? I can, which is why you will need me. I mean, that's Vivec's shtick, basically. It's one of the things about CHIM is that you can see the minds of everyone in Tamriel, and it's like you can understand the thoughts of everyone in Tamriel. And that
divine knowledge.
Not only, but also, Vivec is taking the role of the observer in the enantiomorph in this. Vivec is saying, right, this one is the ruling king. This one is the this one is the king. This one is the thief. Go do your enantiomorph shtick, and therefore we will have a new ruling king.
According to the codes of Mephala, there's no difference between the terrorist and the theorist. We don't really get the codes of Mephala, unfortunately. We don't get a lot of these things. Yeah.
I think the closest we could probably get is maybe, I mean, and even then it's a stretch, like the tenets of the Dark Brotherhood. Like,
it's tenuous at best.
Yeah, I mean, the only connection there would be that the Dark Brotherhood came from the Morak Tong, and they have some codes that they follow. So I don't know.
That's definitely something that I hope we see either in a future game or even like a DLC from ESO. Is like, here's the actual codes of Mephala. Have fun with this, folks.
Yeah, I'd like the teachings of Trinimec.
Oh boy,
that'd be cool.
Content.
Yay! Well, we love. I mean, deep lore nerds love nothing more than a big book of obscure bullshit. It's just,
That's what we do.
So anyway, even the most cherished desire disappears in their hands. This is why Mephala has black hands. This is going to come up again later in the lessons. It's about getting rid of desire in the Crowleyan notion of work free of the lust for result, and it's a deeper, like, sort of thing. Bring both of yours to every argument. The one-handed king finds no remedy. That's obvious. I mean, if you're going to show up, bring your A game. But when you approach God, however, cut both of them off. God has no need of theory, and he's armored head to toe in terror. It's a very sort of Jorge Luis Borges kind of idea, I think, of God being something that doesn't give a rat's ass about ideas and is absolutely terrifying.
I think earlier I was conflating God with the ruling king.
You think?
But I also think here that it's saying something about the nature of truth, which I will bang on about a lot in the 36 lessons, because it comes up remarkably consistently. You look for the word truth in the 36 lessons, and most of the time it is associated with blunt force violence. The new medium's feet are destroyed in the manner of truth, a great hammering. Truth is my husband, instructed to smash, weighty, and all that jazz, like a mace. I think that's going at something similar here, that bring both of your hands to every argument. You beat your opponents up until they accept your point of view.
That's
the Tiber Septim way.
Well, you beat them up with truth, ideally, but
but truth here is violence. So it's all that. And when you approach God, you are in no position to dictate a truth to God. So
exactly.
It's useless.
And
so that's why there's no difference between the theorist and the terrorist, because they are both attempting to establish definite worldviews. The theorist, in the sense that they are testing a hypothesis, is X true? The terrorist saying, this shall be the case, and you will believe it through the force of my violence. And so that's the connection, I think, between those two, and why hands are important here. It's a lesser form of the idea of blunt force trauma that we see elsewhere. But
I always thought the hands had to do with the idea of like the left-handed path and the right-handed path.
I don't know. It
seems a different connotation here.
Unfortunately,
but it has to do with the actual hands, not the sides they're associated with. Right?
When the left-handed and right-handed path are more about the left and right hands of God and the symbolism that's sort of attached to those. Where does Jesus sit, etc. It's the Actually, one of the more interesting ideas that I uncovered while researching the script that I'm writing is the idea that people consider God to be perfect because there is no higher standard with which you could hold God up to and to find flaws, which is an interesting idea, I think, because it's sort of like it stops a lot of arguments if you think about it that way. If you say something like, does God have flaws? The answer is, what standard could you hold God up to find those flaws? Yeah, there is no higher standard, so you can't find flaws. It doesn't mean there aren't any. It just means you can't find them.
It's well, it's debatable. We're getting into the nature of right and wrong in relation to divine action here.
Yeah, exactly.
In which case you have the two models. I know that one is called the divine command theory, saying that an action is right because God does it. And there is the other side, which there's some summary by Leibniz, who he was saying that if there is no higher morality to what God does, then it doesn't matter what God does.
Right.
We are celebrating God regardless of whether he does a good thing or a bad thing.
And and because you can't judge whether it's better, whether it's bad or good, because God, the ultimate power, did it. Yeah.
And his point being that you can still judge, but Leibniz's point is that you can still judge because you've very obviously either got God's favor or you haven't, or God does a good thing, does a bad thing. You can still make those evaluative judgments, and so there is a standard beyond God. Is Leibniz's point? I can't remember the name.
Interesting.
I can't remember the name of the kind of school of thought that fits into. It's got a neat phrase like divine command theory that talks about it, but I can't remember what it is.
I'm going to Google that. If you think about it, let me know. If you remember it, let me know, because that's kind of exactly the ammunition I'm looking for.
Cool.
You also need Michael in here for stuff like this.
Yeah.
I do want to point out.
I did message him.
There you go.
This last chunk of the sermon is what Jubal Lunsul uses to defeat Midian.
Thank you. I forgot to mention that, but yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. In Coda, this is how he gets around to do it. And by the way, if anybody's looking for the Coda website, I don't know what happened to it either. I don't.
Well, I had talked to Kirkbride about it briefly, or maybe I talked to Lady Ann. I talked to one of them, and they said that they aren't in control of the hosting, so something through with the web host. And I guess Kirkbride just hasn't bothered to put up another one.
I don't think it was Kirkbride. It was a Reddit user called Numinit, I think.
Yeah, it was.
That was behind it.
He was the guy who was helping host a lot of stuff on Tomorrowwind and for Jesus. Wow, it's been this long. The Memospore IRC ARGs, and he was hosting the Git repo for Tatterdemalion and a bunch of stuff. So.
Yeah, I remember Kirkbride told me he said, I don't really have control over that.
Yeah.
He thanked me for letting him know that the site was down, and that was about it. So.
Yeah. If I don't know, I'll get in touch with some people and see if I can find the files, and maybe I could figure out a hosting solution. But I just don't know who owns the DNS entry, so that's another ball of. Anyway.
Yes.
So I think this last section, because Jubal uses it to defeat Numidium, I think it's an argument for Jubal being a Nerevarine. Not necessarily the Nerevarine of prophecy, but I'm of the mind that after the events of Morrowind, after the Nerevarine had succeeded, his soul just kept being recycled because Azura's done with it. Why would she? She doesn't care. She's over it.
Reduce, reuse, recycle. Okay.
We sort of assume that the Nerevarine dies during the second coming of Numidium.
Yeah.
Fighting Numidium in Agulukan in a big old kaiju battle. But it's a if I recall correctly, I think Kirkbride confirmed that Jubal Lunsul is the last Shezarine.
Shezarine.
Yeah. The last incarnation of Lorkhan.
I mean, because Because my
all
thing,
Nerevarines are Shezarines, but not all Shezarines are Nerevarines.
so when Jubal goes to the Khajiit surgeon to have his hands removed, he takes a bunch of either skooma or moon sugar, and he gets a moon in one eye and a star in the other.
Ah, okay, that's good.
And then here, the one-handed king finds it's referring to the king speaking to God, and if God is Numidium, armored head to toe in terror, then he had both of his hands cut off. He was the king in that situation. Whether that's for the entire Arbus, I don't know. But he was the Hortator, at least in his soul sense. He was the recycled soul of Nerevar, and went toe to toe with Numidium using the codes of Mephala and Sermon 11. And we know that Jubal reads the sermons because it's said as much in the love letter.
Yeah.
By the way, on a related note of this, that's also kind of funny, a little bit of a personal story. One of my earliest memorable interactions with MK on Facebook was there was a while where one of the viral trends, or like several viral videos that you would see, is when people would start getting into fights in the street, or like, threats, like, yo, you want to fight? And people would be like, all right, let's throw down. And then the dudes would like take off their shirt and drop their pants, revealing that they're in like a super skinny, like really revealing Speedo, like pulled out like Borat style over their shoulders. And they just start like walking towards people, and people would be like, hey man, no, I'm dealing with that. And then they'd like run away. And MK shared one of these, and I just posted as a comment, "Come to God unarmed and wreathed in terror," and it got a laugh. Yeah. Because I mean, like, hey, that's definitely one way to do. It's like, I don't need any weapons. I just need to be cloaked in terror.
I just need to hit you with crazy.
And it's like, I mean, it's pretty terrifying. Yeah.
So anyway, that's Sermon 11. It's got some kind of grim things to say about governance, but I
mean, who doesn't?
It is what it is. Yeah. I mean, there's two things in the world you don't want to watch being made: laws and sausages.
True.
So anyway, I think we've got off next week, and then the week after is Sermon 12.
Yep.
Goody.
Oh God, that's September. What happened to summer, man?
I know. Well, it's still here it's still 90 degrees here in Massachusetts, so.
I mean, yeah, okay, it's hot here too.
It's about that hot here in Washington.
Yeah, keep rubbing it in, dude. We get it. God.
So congratulations to everybody who got bingo, and we will see everybody in 2 weeks. Everybody wave goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.